3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I farted.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely.
Ready?
I can move you. Making reveal. Making reveal.
Say
6,
5.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, listeners. You have found your way to Rank and Review episode 87. Rank and Review versus Star Trek, Volume 2. What would God want with a podcast? Our guest this episode is Paxton Francis and Jaron Francis, two of the biggest Trekkies that I know. And as mentioned, this is part 2, so if you have not listened to part 1, episode 86, you should probably do that first. And if you do that, you'll notice that I call these guys nerds a lot. I'm heard to exclaim the word nerds several times during the episode. And I just want to make it clear, when I say that, what I really mean is I love you. As usual, this episode of Rank and Review is going to have coarse language and spoilers. And as usual, you can send me feedback at rankandreview@gmail.com. That's RANKNREVIEW@gmail.com. You can find the podcast on iTunes, you can find it on Facebook, and if you leave reviews for me there or notices for me there, I will personally read them and see them, so it's really fulfilling for me. I am, as always, your host and random Canadian, Larry Parsons, and thank you so much for listening. Now, let's boldly go, where many podcasts I'm sure have gone before.
Avoid the planet Earth at all costs. We are under the attack of an orbiting probe.
Notify all stations. Starfleet emergency. Red alert.
Earth is on the edge of destruction.
We cannot survive unless a way can be found to respond to the probe.
The key to saving the future
Spock, you're talking about the end of every life on Earth.
can be found only in the past.
We're going to attempt time travel. Sulu, take us home.
These are the voyages of the crew of the Starship Enterprise.
Judging by the pollution content of the atmosphere, I believe we have arrived at the latter half of the 20th century.
Stardate 1986.
San Francisco. Our own world is waiting for us to save it.
They have 24 hours
Everybody remember where we parked. Break up.
to complete their mission.
You look like a cadet review.
We will beam in tonight, collect the photons, and beam out.
I want you all to be very careful.
Without being discovered.
We have an intruder.
All right, who are you?
You're not exactly catching us at our best.
That much is certain.
This is an extremely primitive and paranoid culture.
What does it mean, exact change?
Many of their customs will doubtless take us by surprise.
We're ready for beam out.
My transporter power is down to minimal. I got to bring in one at a time.
You're from outer space.
No, I'm from Iowa. I only work in outer space. Let's do our job and get out of here.
Freeze! Chekhov, can you hear me? Freeze!
So Star Trek for the Voyage Home, or as I like to call it, Humpback to the Future. We talk about sort of the cheesy origins of the Star Trek TV show. I think all 6 of these movies, I will argue that this has the most out there premise that it hang on. But considering we have things like The Troubles with Tribbles, and there's an episode, I believe, where Kirk and Abraham Lincoln team up to fight an alien.
Yes,
Am I making that up?
Savage Crew. There's a lava monster, and that's some terrible season 3
Set on the
shit.
planet Excalibur.
In earnest, Star Trek fans, is there anything too stupid for Star Trek? Is there anything that they can do as a premise in Star Trek that you would think they have officially jumped the shark? That's too far.
Well, if they'd let Gene Roddenberry have everything he wanted.
God.
Punch out Jesus on the bridge.
We go back to the more familiar Star Trek elements of a superpower appears from deep space, seeming to want something, and it's very destructive and powerful and heretofore never heard of. So, sounds like we're going back to number one, which right away seems like a step backwards. As you'll recall, I was less than positive on the first movie.
That's right.
But the solution...
And you were less than positive going into watching Star Trek 4. We should say unlike most Rank and Review episodes, we screened all 6 of these movies together over the course of months.
Yeah. Well, and like I will admit, my memory of the movie was worse than the movie itself ended up being. Or like, it had been so long since I'd seen it. My memory was that it was much goofier than it ended up being when I watched it. But, yeah. The fact that they go back to the premise basically of the first movie, and then they hit us with the time travel, and then we're going to deal with our Star Trek crew in a modern context, in quotation, of 1980. This would be 86?
86, yeah.
Yes. So, very tonally different. Very, very, very tonally different. But I thought going into it that I would come out here saying that it was too tonally different, and that it was like, you know, coming off the backs of 2 super solid Star Treks that, ouch. And I have to say, when we rewatched this movie, I liked it way more than I expected. But what I'm not going to do is sit here and oversell Star Trek 4.
No way. I mean, it does have one foot planted in that era of movies that made Croc Dundee the other huge hit of that summer, right? The movies were playing at exactly the same time. They were both like, you know, oddball, or what's it called, a comedy where somebody's in a situation
Fish Out of Water.
Fish Out of Water comedies set in Manhattan. Like, they had shared some similarities, and they were playing at exactly the same time.
Oh, like somebody in a studio somewhere said, like, let's do Star Trek meets Back to the Future meets Crocodile Dundee. Exactly.
Right,
it seems very calculated.
But it's interesting, they couldn't have had that idea because Croc Dundee was in
production.
They were in production at the same time. But it's interesting the way that happens in movies where things line up and you get 2 similar titles right at the same time doing the same thing. But here's where your different level of familiarity with the original series shows its colors, because it's tonally not very different at all from the original series, because several times this season they went back in time to an Earth-like, they either found an Earth-like planet or went back in time to a different time in Earth's past. Star Trek had already done the let's go back to Earth's past many times at this point. And it feels to me almost like, as they're looking through the old series, Harv Bennett is going, Balance of Terror, Star Trek II, Navy Battle, Rootin' Tootin' Western, the Battle at the OK Corral, whatever that episode is called, Spectre of the Gun. Let's make a Rootin' Tootin' Western, Star Trek III. Number 4, let's go back to contemporary Earth and make a sort of fun episode, because there were oddball comedy episodes of Star Trek as well. Some of them ridiculously comical.
And
so it was just another one of the flavors of the original series coming to the screen. But if you haven't watched much original series, it's the only one of those 6 movies that reads that way. That's like bright and colorful and set in this vivacious Earth place.
It also oddly is, I think, the one that is most out of place amongst the other films in terms of tone.
Yeah.
But the films were tonally quite a departure in a way from the overall feeling of the series. And this felt kind of, I think the reason it was such a huge hit and was the one that was the most commonly thought of as the one everyone loved was because it was a bit of a return to how you felt watching the show.
Yeah.
If you were just a casual fan and just sort of like tuned in syndication to watch every now and then, this experience would feel like that more so than if you went to see Search for Spock and the Enterprise exploded and they're killing Kirk's son, and like nothing terrible like that ever happened in the show. So this was like a purposeful, maybe calculated on Harv Bennett's part or the filmmaker's part, to be like, we've done these dark stories, let's go back to the way Star Trek could also be a frivolous,
Let's have fun.
colorful, light, fun
Right.
popcorn experience.
Yeah. I think their instincts aren't incredibly wrong in that way. And like going into the Marvel universe, I found Ant-Man refreshing because it wasn't a global catastrophe.
Right.
It was a fight over some new tech, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's not a great example because Star Trek 4, the world is at stake, but it never feels like it. The movie doesn't really feel like the world is at stake.
Until the end when they're rewarded as the saviors of human civilization. Are you like, oh yeah, I guess the whole.
But they're just trying to
planet
heist some whales through the whole movie.
Yeah.
There's a lightness to it. And
what do I gotta do to get some whales over here?
There's a lightness to it, and I think that there has to be because of the premise. Like, again, we start saying stuff like, a Klingon bird of prey stops a whaling vessel from hunting whales in this movie. That's a thing that happens in this movie.
It does.
Right? Like,
And it's fucking great.
It's great. It's great when it happens, but it's pretty, like, we've come pretty far.
Scotty
Right?
talks into a keyboard mouse in this movie.
That's right.
Many funny things happen in this movie.
But what I'm really happy to report, and what I would not have anticipated when we watched it, is that I've done a whole series of podcasts on the crazy 80s, on how, like, that decade is really, like, it's unmistakable when you're watching a deeply 80s movie. Like, you're not going to confuse it with anything else. And it could have really easily taken over the movie. There are a few moments, yes, where we can laugh at the hairstyles and the music.
It almost did.
It almost did. But the tone of the movie stays Star Trek.
Yeah.
Because I think that if this had been taken over by the 80s and become Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo,
Yeah. The movie
this could have
tickles-
really cratered really easily.
It
easily.
tickles right up against too silly.
Yeah.
Sequences like the zany breakout from the hospital, right? Doctor gave me a pill and I grew a new kidney.
Yeah.
They're, almost what's his name?
The cops who don't know that they're supposed to
fast
pursue
forward
the
chases
criminals.
around Benny Hill, almost
Right.
sort of chase through the hospital. But Star Trek, yeah, it's sillier than any of the other Star Trek, but I'm not sure I agree with you, Jaron, that it's tonally more different from the others.
No, I
think number
what I
one
meant to say
might
was that
stand out tonally, or
at
maybe
this
that's
point
just the pacing
in the
of it.
release schedule, when you hit 86 and this comes out, I think people, the reason I think it was successful is because I think they recognized that people would have an appetite for this tone of film now after 2 and 3.
Right.
That's all. Because this was present in the show.
Say what you
These
will,
type of
even if you don't
episodes.
like it, they were not fucking repeating themselves here.
No, they did the same thing that they had done. With each movie, I think they just decided, okay, well, let's not do what we've done before.
Yeah.
Let's do a different type of Star Trek movie.
Let's take a different flavor of episode, because we are making
And
Star
form
Trek
it around
after
that,
all,
yeah.
and make a movie that sort of fits that flavor, and they hadn't made a lighthearted romp.
Yeah, and if it had been another, Wrath of Khan or Search for Spock, I just think it would be that much more diluted. As much as Search for Spock was slightly diluted from Wrath
And
of
then
Khan.
number 5, if it hadn't had the budget gutted repeatedly,
Might have been.
was the fourth flavor of episode that Harv Bennett chose, and with Shatner, which was, let's get philosophical, like Star Trek does sometimes when it's really good.
Yeah.
Well, and there's not much philosophy to be found here. There is stuff that really make me smile. I'd completely forgotten somehow about Spock diving into the whale.
Mind melding with the whale.
Mind meld with the whale.
Gracie is pregnant.
Which is another one of those things when you say it out loud, it just sort of tips your hand as to how ludicrous this movie really is in its premise, right? Spock dives into a tank with a whale and mind melds with it.
And
well, why is that ridiculous? When they go to an alien planet and meet alien life, I mean, he mind melded with the Horta. He'll mind meld with anything.
And obviously these whales
Sludge,
are hyper intelligent.
mind meld with it, right?
Because the whole hinge of the plot, again, sort of silly, is that these whales were able to communicate with this probe that was so far away. It's taken this long for the probe to get there to find out why their buddies, the whales, have no longer been answering their calls.
Yep.
This is all just like what happened to my buddy.
I don't want to go on too much of a tangent with the male or with the whale mind meld.
Right.
But I wonder if a whale can give informed consent for a mind meld.
Yeah.
Right? Like Spock does mind meld rape somebody later in the series. We can talk about that when we get there. And we see him in other places sort of ask or solicit permission before a mind meld.
Yeah.
But you can't ask a whale for permission. I suppose you could just sort of tickle her mind and say, hey, do you mind if I read? And she's like, yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
And
Get
and then
right
you
in
mind
there.
meld. But I don't know, Spock maybe kind of like date mind meld rapes that whale in the tank in San Francisco that one night, that one summer.
The whole time that Spock's got the headband, which was, I guess, briefly fashionable in the 80s to cover his ears. Chekhov with his thick, lazy accent asking where the nuclear vessels are in the middle of the Cold War. This is particularly weird. And the fact that this police officer still seems bemused by this.
Yeah.
Now, Jaron, you said that some of those passerby reactions were genuine, and I think maybe some of them are. I don't think they all are they?
Well, the cop is an actor.
Okay, the cop is
because they film an actual scene with him, but they set up the cameras and just had the
so
two of them
people
stop people on the street, and then if
I think they're across the bay in Alameda. Is that woman a paid actress or is she a passerby?
No, they just got her. They had somebody set up on the other side of the street who
signed in
anybody
forms.
That they gave the basically the cut print sign to for that chick. Then somebody would grab her and say, "Can we get you to sign some release forms? We're filming a movie over here."
I think that better than the previous movies, they give more of the crew stuff to do.
Yeah.
Like they spread the goods around the cast a lot.
Sulu
better.
and Scotty get that really fun errand to go get the plexiglass/transparent aluminum for the whale
change
tank.
the course of human history with
right,
their tech.
Right. Uhura and Chekhov go and get the photons from the Enterprise's engines, the aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
Sulu doesn't really get to do a lot.
Sulu flies a helicopter.
Yeah, that's it.
He, I get the feeling though that not only did that chopper pilot teach Sulu how to fly a Huey, but I think George Takei took him to bed too. I think Sulu had plenty to do in that movie. Yeah.
His storyline got cut.
If Takei's trailers are rocking, don't come a knocking without KY.
Sulu was supposed to meet his great grandfather or something, but the kid that they found to film the scene, they couldn't get him to calm down enough. He kept crying, so they just didn't shoot it.
Well, and you know
would
what?
add a little bit more of it.
I get it. Like when you got this many balls in the air, someone's going to get short shrift. I always thought that Kaylee got a short bum deal in the Firefly movie, but what are you going to do? With that many characters, you're going to probably lose somebody. But more so than any of the movies up till this point, I think they spread the goods amongst the cast in a good way. And I felt like everybody had stuff to do for the most part.
Right.
Stuff to do.
Interestingly, of all of the main characters, the one who he has plenty to do, McCoy, but he doesn't have much of an arc for number 4, which is kind of interesting considering he's the one who had just carried Spock's, whatever the hell it was called, his soul. McCoy, there's a little bit at the beginning of McCoy kind of like shaking it off. He's still a little bit different.
He has some fun with Spock.
And Spock's mostly the one who's still a little bit different, but McCoy doesn't have any kind of arc for himself.
No, he just functions as Kirk's thought wall. He just throws things back at him and offers resistance so that Kirk has something to dialogue against. But I just wanted to say, like you said, they spread the goods around.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I dislike most about this movie is the result of that. Like all this, like Chekhov having the chase sequence that's thrilling is fun, but Kirk is the one that, particularly watching it this last time, is the one that really feels shortchanged. Kirk doesn't really have anything character-wise to struggle with in this movie.
You certainly
it's
won't
all
believe
picking
the
up
fate
the
of
pieces after David and after having knowing he's going back to Earth to go to prison, yet he can't change the fact that he is a certain way and he's going to try to save the world anyway.
His smug optimism has obviously survived the death of his son, because there's a bounce to Kirk in this movie that is like that you don't almost buy the stakes that the planet Earth is at stake. If they don't get these whales back, people are going to die, and that's it.
Some of that bounce might come from the fact that he's back in. Well, no, he's not really back in the captain's seat where he belongs until the end of the movie when they give him the Enterprise back. But
he's not expecting that to happen
the whole time.
Yeah.
Which is lucky for their premise, because
he's really
cloaked in Central Park. For the whole
he's feeling pretty damn motivated to get everybody home. You're right; he's maybe a bit too plucky about things. But
the way he deals with the lady at the aquarium,
all of his crew, they all broke the law to come and help him save his buddy, and he's really got to pull out all the stops to get these people home, save the world, blah blah blah. But meanwhile, he's just drinking Michelob with some blonde at a bar. That being said, Kirk womanizes his way through the show like he's James Bond.
No, I totally
and this is the first time we get to see
him
have any kind of romantic angle. Now it's too bad, since that character was sort of set up for a return, possibly, right? Like they could have brought I'm sure that Bennett had that on the shelf in the back of his mind as like, maybe this could be a future love interest for Kirk. He's the first woman that Kirk's ever brought back from the past.
She is now becoming the fish out of water. Yeah,
exactly. It was Reverse Croc Dundee. It was the second half of the movie where second movie where she goes to Australia.
I want to point out that Gillian, the cetacean biologist, was originally supposed to be played by Eddie Murphy.
Oh, really?
Imagine, like you were saying, how close this came to cratering.
Yeah.
As terrible
as
80s, wacky 80s. Imagine, like, what would have made this movie, put an 80s stamp on this movie more than Eddie Murphy being in it?
Well, if Eddie Murphy had been playing a woman cetacean biologist in drag.
In a fat suit.
Yeah.
To be fair, this was the time where Eddie Murphy could do anything, and people would line up for it.
Yeah.
I'm sure he was, projected to be in every movie in production, because if you had Eddie Murphy in your movie, it was a hit.
Well, people were lining up for Star Trek without Eddie Murphy. So.
What I wanted to bring up about this woman who comes back from the past into our Star Trek timeline is, if I was, going to be running a Star Trek show or looking at making a Star Trek movie, my first fucking rule, day one to the cast and everybody, is no fucking time travel. We're done. We're closing the books on time travel. Because it opens up problems. It really does. Like, presumably, I guess she was fated to come with them, but otherwise perhaps she had a kid with somebody else. And then that kid had, another kid, and then that led to Kirk fucking existing, right? Like, the whole timeline.
Well, we don't know that Gillian had a kid.
We don't
necessarily.
know. We don't know, and maybe this is all necessary to happen.
This is Harv Bennett's influence. He would say, "I don't give a shit. You're thinking too much."
I understand, but these are the wormholes that you open up when you start playing with time travel. And I know that this is a bouncy, silly movie, and they're not even going to begin to address it, but it always distracts me. Time travel is just fucking messy. So it's a sticking point with me. If you're making a fun bouncy movie like Back to the Future, great. But this is Star Trek, and there's some kind of continuity. I realize that a different actress played Saavik in a couple different movies. I can accept that, but is there one reality? Is this different timeline now? I don't know. I hate the metaphysical bullshit that time travel always opens up, and it's always problematic in Star Trek. And they go to that well again and again and again.
Yeah. This is the only movie when they do.
We've mentioned City on the Edge of Forever.
Until we get into the next generation shit, but yeah,
they don't count.
We've mentioned City on the Edge of Forever. This is the third time now, but it's interesting that the same show that had that episode would later in that movie so frivolously disregard the notion of don't fuck up the timeline.
Yeah.
Right? They go there, they teach them how to make transparent aluminum 200 years before anyone's supposed to know, and Scotty and McCoy are just
but Scotty and McCoy, meh, whatever. Didn't learn the lesson that Kirk
This is me being a self-hating nerd right now. But it really does bother me, every time.
They don't get in trouble for stealing Enterprise, doing all of this stuff, nor do they get in trouble for blatantly disregarding Starfleet regulations about messing with the timeline. But they did save the entire planet. They managed to find a couple of humpbacks. They bring them back to the future.
Humpback
the whale probe makes some happy space whale love and goes on its merry way. And Stella gets her groove back, right? Like, they get a shiny, spanking new Enterprise.
But here's the thing, I recommend Star Trek 4. I just say know what you're getting into. If you're walking into this wanting to see Wrath of Khan, well, you're going to be disappointed. Just go fucking watch Wrath of Khan again.
But if you have fond memories of Star Trek 4 and you're thinking, I'd watch Star Trek 4 again, except it'll probably just be all 80s and shitty.
It's not that.
It's not.
Yeah.
Well, it's all 80s. It's just not shitty.
It's all 80s and not nearly as shitty as it could have been if things had been just a little different.
But I think we would be lying if we didn't all admit that it was a step or two down from the last couple of pages.
It's true, but we'd also all be lying if we didn't admit that one of our favorite moments in Star Trek is Spock nerve pinching the punk rocker on the bus. Like, you gotta love Star Trek 4. There are some great moments.
The things that tie this one to the previous two and make it a bit of a trilogy, or why they're thought of as a trilogy, don't really have anything to do with what happens in this movie, though.
No, they have to do with them getting home, and then the bow that's tied on it is Spock finally making peace with his father, which is something that's been ongoing.
Well, I had never thought of that until you pointed it out when we watched it this time. But the fact that Kirk is rewarded at the end of this for, as the guy says, the proof you've shown time and again for belonging beyond a shadow of a doubt in this place, and we're going to put you there. And having that the reassurance he needs after everything that he's lost, and like he has a place in the universe again.
Mm-hmm.
If they hadn't made another Star Trek movie and it had just ended with them
I'd be
hopping
happy.
on the Enterprise and him saying, "Let's see what she's got," and it had just ended, that would have been okay.
That's exactly why I say that 3-episode package, movies 2, 3, 4 is.
But ending up there has nothing to do with anything that happens in Star Trek 4. It just has to do with the fact that the repercussions of his choices in 3 don't come to fruition till the end of 4.
Right. And this is the one I keep on conflating the movies together for some reason, where they punish him by demoting him to captain and giving him his own starship.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's a punishment / reward. I like that.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a good ending. And the Spock conflict. I mean, you have to dig a little deeper into Star Trek to fully understand that Spock was an abused child, basically. Right. His father rejected him in many ways because Spock was half human
aspect.
Right,
yeah.
Spock's mother's human. Sarek never really fully approved of him. Sarek disapproved of Spock's choice to join Starfleet and to live among the humans and all of that. And it's not really present in the show because the nature of television at the time was really episodic, and things like that would be addressed in an episode and wouldn't really be left to hang. There's stuff, funny enough, in the animated series that delves into that stuff about Spock's past and his father not
his pets.
He's like his Sarek's least favorite, that sort of thing, and Spock's pet
Targ.
No, the Targ is the Klingon thing. Yeah. Anyway, finally at the end of that movie, Sarek openly shows his care.
Yeah.
He says he was wrong too. You don't learn till Next Generation that it kind of gets turned on its ear what you thought it was. You learn that he was actually a shitty father.
Yeah.
Because his son was half human, he knew from the outset he didn't understand the way he was, and it pissed him off that he had to deal with a half human son, and that he didn't.
And that pissed him off even more because he's not supposed to get pissed off. He's a Vulcan.
So he blamed his son for it. So you don't find that out till much later.
And neither does Spock.
So when he says he's wrong, basically, that my assessment of your decision was wrong.
As
to nerds like us, it means a lot.
That's right.
To nobody else does it mean shit.
And Spock does learn more about how his father truly felt about him later, because Spock lives a couple hundred more years and would later meet, not quite that long, but he would later meet Captain Jean-Luc Picard, who once upon a time we find out met Sarek and mind melded with Sarek, and so offers Spock the opportunity, if you'd like to mind meld with me, you'll be able to touch your father's mind, because contrary to what's normal, Sarek and Spock had never touched
They'd never
minds,
melded.
which is apparently very
so he doesn't find out till
between
then that his
father and
dad,
son, that
his
dad
father
truly
actually loved
did
him.
love him.
That was the big daddy finally admitted that he loved me.
Yeah. He admits it at the end of 4, and then Spock really feels it.
It's really weird. I actually watched that episode recently too, as I was making my way through, and it occurred to me that was only 5 years after Voyage Home came out. Like that's not a really long space of time in terms of movie storytelling.
Not for the fans, but
it just feels like ages would have gone. Maybe because I was a child when that came out, so a year felt like an amazing amount of time.
Summer vacation.
But to think
forever.
that you see him with his father in Star Trek 4, and then they're both in that Next Generation episode, and that storyline gets resolved. That some same writers maybe were involved in making that happen.
Yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, I like I said, I'm impressed with Star Trek 4, and that it was way better than I expected it to be. But I would be hard pressed to say it's an amazing movie.
Yeah.
Star Trek fans are obviously going to like it because it's called Star Trek. But for the outsiders, I think take it or leave it. It's not bad. This
was my first pass at Star Trek 4 in high def. It was my first pass at any of these movies in high def, was for this podcast. And I was really expecting the cracks to show in the effects in this movie.
For the most part, pretty solid.
And it looked quite
some of the
good.
whale stuff doesn't look that great. But
I think that
some of the whale stuff,
beginning, some of the animations, sort of, you could see the edges.
You could see some matte lines.
You could see some matte lines, but some of a lot of the whale footage was gorgeous. They went and shot some pretty cool nature footage for
but the majority of it is animatronics.
But some of there's a lot of animatronic stuff. I think it looks decent, but you know, the matte paintings look good. All kinds of stuff looks really good in that movie. Now, it actually did have a bigger budget than 2 or 3, but not by much. Like, they made all of those movies on the cheap, like 12 million, 20 million, 30 million.
And it seems like it would be way cheaper because there's so little space stuff. It's all set in the modern era.
Yeah, they're just wandering around.
They have to build
San
half the
Francisco.
amount of
Yeah,
sets.
but so much location shooting. Yeah. Location shooting's expensive.
And they shot on an actual boat, looks like. So, like...
yeah. But they shot on an actual boat. They also shot places like Times Square. That's a pretty expensive day.
Yeah.
Right? It's a pretty expensive day to shoot at, you know, the naval base.
Well, they
in
didn't
San
shoot in
Francisco,
Times Square because that's in New York, but...
they're in San Francisco.
Yeah.
But they shot all sorts of places.
You're
I
thinking
think
of
of New York because of Crocodile.
Yeah, totally. That scene
That's
where
right.
it cuts to them walking in the street and that saxophone comes in the background. That's totally Croc Dundee.
It's got to be expensive to shut down a hospital for a day and run a rampant chase through it, that sort of thing.
I think we've come to the conclusion, though, that the thing that this movie was missing was Paul Hogan.
There wasn't enough Paul Hogan in this movie. I would have liked Paul Hogan maybe as one of the whales.
Only one crew dare travel where no man has ever gone before.
We'll need all the power you can muster, mister.
On a desolate planet, a renegade Vulcan seeks ultimate knowledge.
To find it, you'll need a starship.
And he will stop at nothing to get it.
I dreamt that a madman had taken over the Enterprise.
You look like you've just seen a ghost.
Perhaps I have, Captain. Our destination is the planet Shakari, Eden, at the center of the galaxy.
The center of the galaxy can't be reached.
If you ask me, and you haven't, I think this is a terrible idea. We're bound to bump into the Klingons.
Remain on course.
To Kirk, he's a fanatic to be fought.
You know we'll never make it through the Great Barrier.
I say the danger is an illusion.
To the crew, he's a mystic to be followed.
Cybok has simply put us in touch with feelings that we've always been.
I have to get back to the transporter.
To Spock, he's the past he must confront.
Shoot him!
You know I'm right.
Spock, my only concern is getting the ship back. And you're either with me or you're not.
Put him in the brig with Captain Kirk.
I'm a prisoner on my own ship.
What are you standing around for? Do you not know a jailbreak when you see one?
Mr. Scott, you're amazing.
There's nothing amazing about it. I know this ship like the back of my hand.
After an intermission of a week or so, we're going to continue on with our Star Trek discussion. How long has it been?
That was quite a nap.
Longer than a week. 10 days, maybe?
I have no concept of time.
I was just asleep.
We're going to talk about Star Trek 5. Five. We're on 5. Star Trek 5, The Final Frontier. I remember when we were watching this movie, you guys we were talking a little bit about it while it was on, and I felt the fandom there. I felt you guys wanting to make this movie good.
That's all you have while watching this movie.
So, as much as I felt that, in the same way I felt it from, like, when I talked about Star Wars, both Ashley and Dorian, I felt a little bit of pushback on the prequels. Like, Ashley saw them when she was really young, so, you know, they had lightsabers.
Those were her Star
and Dorian was
Star
like,
Wars
if you read some of the other stuff around this kind of makes sense and is sort of cool in a backwards kind of way, right? And you're trying to course correct for it.
Right.
Well, I see where you guys are coming from, but this movie is terrible. I'm sorry, it's not a good movie. It's not a good movie. But it's tough for me as far as where to rank it in the spectrum, because whereas the first movie frustrated me, I saw what they were going for there. They were trying to go highbrow with it and trying to move Star Wars up to a different level. They didn't know, Star Trek, pardon me, Star Trek to a different level. They didn't really know what the Star Trek movie franchise was going to be yet. But when we come to Star Trek 5, everybody knows what the Star Trek franchise should be. And it
Except William Shatner, apparently.
Here.
And everybody is under the understanding as they're making the movie that this is to be the final. This is the Star Trek swan song
that they're
for the original
remembered.
crew, right?
This is the last
piece,
one.
Yeah.
Right. The final frontier. And wowzers. I mean, first of all, don't put me in the same boat as my brother. I've never defended this movie to the extent he does.
But I felt that energy in the room.
Yeah, and the things that I like about this movie, I just when I have to watch it, or when I do choose to watch it because I'm running a fever or something, and I've watched all of the airplane movies already, then I'll watch this movie and I'll really enjoy the campfire marshmallow roast, or I'll really enjoy them singing "Row, row, row your boat" at the end. Row, 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 row your boat.
Row your boat.
The movie is ridiculous. Jaron, you can probably fill us in a little bit when we talk about it on some of the challenges in the production and why the movie's even worse than it might have been if it had every chance it could have. But we should probably do... This is one of the Star Trek movies that listeners might be less familiar with.
Well, I think they kind of go back to the, a strange entity appears in the far reaches of space that sort of demands an answer or a response. And they have what should be a really interesting villain in this sort of Vulcan zealot religious figure who's sort of...
An emotional Vulcan.
Yeah.
On paper, it sounds pretty good. He's Spock's brother. That's a mystery for a little while.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to be played by...
Sean Connery.
Sean Connery.
Once upon a time when the movie had money.
He touched a bullet there, eh?
The point is, he sort of...
Hello, Spock.
This evil Vulcan sort of builds this cult around himself to cross this great space barrier and confront this entity which he believes to be God.
The barrier at the center of the galaxy.
And I mean, this sounds like more familiar return to Star Trek, tropes that we've seen in the past, but workable, right? Workable.
Especially since the way he surrounds himself with the cult is by helping people to face the mistakes they've made and become stronger as a result.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know it's paper thin gray area, but there's a gray area that he's working in. He's not just a villain.
You see, for me, I think that one of my big problems is that they don't pull the trigger on that character. I say
I think he's a straight up villain.
Let him be an evil Vulcan. Let him be bad. And the movie doesn't quite let that happen.
I think he is. I mean, maybe the movie doesn't treat him as bad enough, but
because it's tragic
risks
at
the
the
lives of all of those people just to get through the barrier at the center of the galaxy. He does it all because he has a vision or a feeling or whatever.
And somehow by getting people to confront their worst emotions, that he gets immediate, unbridled loyalty from them. It's like they get one great session with a shrink, and all of a sudden, not only is it a thank you, but I will follow your any command, and I will violate any belief system that I had previous to meeting you 10 minutes ago.
See, and this is one of the places,
and his whole motivation hangs on that. Why people follow him hangs on this thing that we never truly get. Well, we don't get any imagistic sense of how it works until like an hour into the movie.
I don't like how everybody likes him except for Kirk. That bothered me.
It's true, and I want to get to that too, but I wanted to bring us back to the plot synopsis. Right. Something where, Jaron, you were saying that the way Spock,
you can do that the whole thing.
Sybok converts his followers by releasing their pain, using some of his Vulcan mind whammy powers that
some
Vulcans
kind
have.
of empathic
He's
ability.
Developed it to a new level where he can probe their memories and help them absolve themselves of their mistakes, etc. So we get an interesting sequence later in the movie as Sybok hijacks the ship and is moving it towards the center of the galaxy, where he has taken over most of the crew at the point where Spock and
everybody but the
McCoy and Kirk are the last three who ever haven't been converted.
Oh, and Scotty.
And so Spock faces his pain, and McCoy has the scene where he relives pulling the plug on his father.
Yeah.
And Kirk, this is one of the places where Shatner's ego really shows, is of course the only guy who's immune to Sybok's powers.
Well, he just rejects even.
He just rejects the whole thing, but Sybok seems to be able to whammy everybody else.
Yeah, but just to keep defending the movie, that's probably how this is going to go. Is you guys poke holes and I offer defense. If you think about it, nobody else in the movie up till the point where Kirk says, "No, I don't want my pain taken away," understands what's at work. So he's watched it happen to his two best friends and now has an understanding of what it's done to them.
Yeah, nobody
and he
else
doesn't even allow Sybok to move toward him or start the process.
And you have to meet him halfway. You get that idea that you need to.
You have to want it, and he knows if this is what you're going to do to me, that's the opposite of what I want. Yeah. Because without my pain, I won't be me. Yeah. The things that I like about myself, to the extent that I've sacrificed everything else, will go away.
Yeah.
My need my pain drives me, and the drive is why I am who I am.
I just think it would be more interesting that if, instead of him being genuinely a religious zealot, that he knew that this was a sham and this was all a pledge for power, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think that he could
just to get them to the...
Yeah, to get followers, to get, like a genuine cult leader would be, right? You know, because what happens is the movie sort of tries to make a tragic fate out of this Vulcan and gives us a bad guy in the last 10 minutes, which is ridiculous and pointless.
Yeah, except...
The bad guy at the center of the galaxy. We should just finish off the synopsis and then move into ripping it apart and defending it. Whatever is that there's a being at the center of the galaxy who's been masquerading as, well, he pretends to be Jehovah, the god of the Jews and Christians and Muslims, and of course the crew sees through that pretty quickly, and he zaps them with some I-beams, and then I believe they blow it up with a
photon torpedo.
Kaboom, and his disembodied godhead.
No, then it takes some like Klingon gunnery.
That's
they
right.
have to phaser him a
gets
little
in
bit
there
and disrupt
zaps him up with disruptors.
But that does the trick. That kills God.
Yes, I seem to remember God being killed with the help of a
relatively easily.
Now I have a problem with the movie that's central that I want to talk about before we get too far away from it, because you just
is that enough synopsis?
You just mentioned it.
I think we have the whole movie there.
Yeah. If you want to know more, then sit through The Final Frontier.
It's worth it.
It is maybe worth it if it's worth listening to this podcast.
It's
definitely worth watching the movie, of course.
Yeah.
Unlike the really interesting, do the needs of the one ever outweigh the needs of the many? Philosophical question that 2, 3, 4 examines.
Yeah.
The philosophical question 5 is a person driven and defined by his pain? And Kirk seems to argue, and the movie seems to argue pretty strongly in favor of the fact that yes, that's what drives him anyway, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of nonsense that people are driven by their pain. I think somebody who really feels like it's his pain that drives him is maybe not healthy. And maybe that's an interesting thing about Kirk, is that he's not ever been particularly mentally healthy, right? But the interesting thing about it is I think that maybe a person is more defined by how good they are at releasing themselves from pain. And maybe that's what Kirk's talking about, is that he needs to be able to deal with his own pain instead of getting Shybok magicking it away.
Yeah,
with
he
his
says,
powers.
"Damn it, Bones, you're a doctor. You know pain can't be removed with a wave of a magic wand."
That's right. You've got to cope with it and deal with it yourself.
It's not that he distrusts the goal, I don't think, as much as he distrusts Cybok. He doesn't want to become one of his mindless cult members on his own ship, when his ship is the only thing he gives a shit about.
Do you think the movie's supposed to be an attack on the pharmaceutical industry? Is Cybok sort of like an antidepressant?
It's like they're exchanging their pain for their free will, though, right? They lose their pain, but they also seem to,
they
just become almost...
Do they lose their free will, or do they find it to be so super awesome that they all unanimously speak in favor of Shybok because it feels like they're really happy? They feel amazing.
Except those three don't. There's something about their makeup, their experience with him that's what I'm saying about, like, how when he puts the mind whammy on Bad Tooth Guy at the beginning of the movie, that guy has no idea what's going on. Cybok just looks at him and there's some drumming in the background, and then he feels so great, he's grateful. So it's coming from gratefulness, and I believe in you because you were able to do something that made me feel so good, I want to follow you now.
But that's not how it's played all of the time.
No, and that's where the movie fails.
Yeah.
That's what's bad about the movie.
A lot of the times it just seems like they've become pod people.
Its internal logic doesn't work.
Bones and Spock, though, are quite affected by their experience with Cybok and having their pain probed. McCoy in particular, but both of them are. It's not until Kirk refuses that they sort of shake it off. And
their loyalty to him outweighs what they've gained.
It's very old Star Trek, but it's very white hat, black hat. Captain Kirk is always the one guy that can resist the mind beam the longest, or the one guy that can do this. And,
that's why he's Captain Kirk, though.
If I felt more certain of what that was supposed to say in this movie, which is, no, don't let go of your pain, hang on to it and let it drive you, then I might be less confused by the fact that Kirk is the one who sort of snaps everybody out of it.
This is maybe
argument.
A good place to chime in then with some of the stuff that you said about what I could tell you about like what went on behind the scenes.
Okay.
This movie originally was supposed to be the search for actual God, and I don't know who it was, probably Gene Roddenberry. Somebody put the kibosh on that and said, I think it was Roddenberry told him, no, Bill, I've tried to do God before the studio won't go for real God. Oh, okay, well, what if we go in search of God and find somebody masquerading as God who's actually an evil entity? And he's like, yeah, you can do that. That's fine.
That. We did that for breakfast.
So immediately, the movie that he wanted to make, which was about actually finding God in the traditional sense, was turned into something else from page one. So he's already not making the movie he wanted to make.
Right.
Then throughout the filming process, all through production, the budget continued to be cut. So the scene, for instance, where Cyborg is putting the whammy on Bones and Spock, I don't know specifically if that scene is an example, but they would have, say, 3 days to shoot a scene, and then the day before they're supposed to start, they'd all of a sudden only have 2 days to shoot a scene, that kind of a thing, because the schedule just kept getting redone. So, as a result, they couldn't shoot the same scene. They'd have to rewrite the scene on like a weekly basis. They'd be rewriting stuff. In addition to which, there'd be scenes written that people would object to. So that scene in particular, in the script, Kirk was supposed to be turned upon by both of them. Spock was supposed to side with Sybok, and Kirk was supposed to be completely alone against him.
The script kind of telegraphs
and Nimoy
like that's
just
where
flat
it's
out
going.
said no. He's like, no.
Spock would not
never,
trust
ever
this guy.
turn against Kirk. That just wouldn't happen. That, like, people watching this movie who know the characters won't buy that.
But the momentum of the script is moving towards that happening when Spock and McCoy are so affected by their Shybok
And I think
experience.
the reason the movie is so hard to watch is because the unevenness present is people, like, I think Nimoy's instinct was correct, but then they should not have written a scene ever where that was to take place.
Right.
It should have been solved before it became the problem
that's
it became.
The problem. Like, if you're writing the movie as you go, that's, like, almost never a good sign.
Yeah, especially if you're William Shatner writing the
And
movie.
if you're spending millions of dollars, even if it's significantly less than the previous films, wait till you're ready to shoot. But my problems reach even bigger than that.
Oh, I'm not saying that's the film's only
everybody on
problems.
board should have known that Uhura doing a fucking feather dance, boa dance or whatever, to distract the guards, was on its face an
ridiculous,
absolutely stupid idea. The fact that scene got shot and taken seriously, like the fact that that's there is such damning evidence to the film. Like,
and the
of all
really
the things
sad
that got
thing
cut that stage,
is that all of the stories that you hear about Nichelle Nichols being proud about moving women's rights forward,
black women
and
having
all
a black
that,
presence on
that
the
when
bridge.
it comes to Star Trek: The Swan Song, that is
her
what
booty.
Uhura gets to do, is a naked.
That's her
fucking
standout moment in the movie.
Geriatric striptease. Couldn't they have had Uhura do something a little bit better? They let
I remember
Deanna
finding it
Troi
kind of sexy when I was a 9-year-old watching this.
They let Deanna Troi fly the fucking ship. Why couldn't they let
but she
Uhura do
crashed it.
something real? Well, of course.
Well, but not only that, but the fact that all these guards, these like cultists, would immediately drop their guard and their guns and just wander over with their jaws hanging open.
Yeah,
it's
because
like,
apparently they
it's
don't
a
have women on
cartoon
Nimbus 3.
sequence. This belongs in the Naked Gun movies, okay? Not the fucking Star Trek movies. And again, the Shat should have known that. He was calling action and cut.
Yeah.
Like, say what we will was going on behind the scenes.
Yeah,
They
well, I
fucked
think
this movie up.
I think his ego was probably driving most of those decisions.
How close to ground floor was Harv Bennett on the God element of the storyline? Was he part of who pushed it to be a deity, a false deity, pretending to be Jehovah?
I don't know who made that call, but once the call was made, that's what allowed the movie to go into production as a movie where they go in search of God, which was Shatner's concept that he was pushing. Also, the only reason he got to direct a movie was because he's had in his contract since the movies.
He gets whatever Nimoy gets.
Whatever Nimoy gets, I get. So because Nimoy had directed Star Trek 3,
he gets to direct.
He was supposed to direct 4. He's like, it's my turn now. And they wanted Nimoy back, and to his credit, he was like, well, okay, yeah, I don't... Go ahead, he'll direct it, but then I do 5.
And thank goodness. Imagine if Shatner had directed that ridiculous script. Nimoy managed to hold it together. I think Shatner would have been
on a
massive
technical
issue.
level, like, the movie looks okay for the most part. There's some dated special effects in it, but I'm not even going to be like that slack on him as a director stylistically. but clearly
it's
this
so
movie,
bland and.
But he gets the job done, right? Like, he's unobtrusive.
It feels like an episode, though.
Right.
Whereas
feels like a cheap episode.
2, 3, and 4, yeah, totally. 2, 3, and 4 have a grandeur to them just in what's going on. That even though some of the sets, especially by today's standards, seem pretty like cardboardy, it doesn't matter. It's kind of just charming, and to me, it doesn't make the movies feel small.
I thought watching those
and
ones
5
again
does,
in high
totally.
def. I thought watching none of those 3, 2, 3, and 4 were not harmed by the 1080p transfer that we watched. 5, I felt like it was.
Yeah.
I felt 5 looked like it was made of cardboard. I thought
there's a horrible shot of Kirk falling. There's like a
the rocket boot sequence.
And then Spock does the rocket boots.
Yeah,
it looks pretty bad.
And like the oil.
Just
oil
too bad
and water
because all
at
of the
end.
previous footage of him free climbing El Capitan is really great footage.
Yeah.
And then the fall.
Yeah. It's pretty brutal. He's very clearly just like strung up by his hips, the way he's awkwardly dangling from his hips, and his legs are kind of pointing down a bit too. It doesn't make much sense gravity wise.
Yeah.
It stings.
And again, most of the special effects problems, well, it was 2 things.
Budget cuts.
The model had been damaged, so they could only film it in certain ways.
The model had been vandalized
Enterprise.
and spray painted on one side when they took it out of storage.
And they would not pay to make a new one.
No.
So they just had to shoot it
They
in
wouldn't
certain
even
angles.
pay to repaint it properly, so they had 2 anglers, like a starboard aft angle, and there was one sort of front-on angle from which they
and
could
they reuse
shoot
footage
it.
from motion picture when the ship flies
they're
over.
course correcting constantly for all of these adversities. So maybe we should be saying congratulations for making a movie that was
That
even
doesn't
halfway
affect the
watchable,
final ranking of a movie. You can't judge a movie based on how
it might
they
have
were
been.
trying to make.
There was all if you're not ready to shoot, don't shoot the movie. Like it gets expensive once you start rolling film, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you needed a few more months of pre-production, if they have to delay the movie another 6 months, so be it.
The reason I could still watch this movie and not just like hate the experience is because the stuff that was always my favorite things about Star Trek, my favorite parts of the movies to watch, is the stuff that comes through in this one and is the most watchable. So them around the campfire having, I'm not going to call it witty banter, but very on-point character banter that's appropriate for them, where the chemistry...
And where they give it time
the
to
dialogue,
actually have a whole
it breathes,
scene
right.
of banter
the dialogue
instead of a moment.
Serves those characters and is in character for them. It's stuff that I believe it right away. It's the tone of the show.
It's also part of why it feels like an episode, though. Is that they
exactly.
take the time to have a 10-minute campfire sequence in a movie where the pacing of 2, 3, and 4, you would never have time for the 3 of them to just have tea for 10 minutes of screen time.
Yeah.
Well, and here's the other thing that I'm going to say that I think you guys might not like as much. Whereas I'm 100% on board for the scene with DeForest Kelly confronting, the pain in his life. I think that might be one of the best scenes he's had, like maybe in the whole series.
Yeah, in the movies at least.
In the series of movies I'm talking about, here. Where I don't go with you so much as I don't know that the row your boat thing landed for me at all. I think there was a bit of a snicker factor for me that really shouldn't have been there. And
yeah, no, that's possible.
It was already in '89. It was already a nostalgic thing for me, and I know it's corny. I know it's corny completely. I do think that some of the campfire stuff is legitimately good banter for those characters, but I don't think any of the trip to Yosemite is all total corn dog stuff. Right?
I think the reason it resonated for me, even as a kid, and I wouldn't have been able to put my finger on this then, but it continued for a while in my life before it changed to any degree, which was like when Kirk says, we don't have families, he's sort of saying like we're all loners, we're just loners together.
I think he's
That's
trying to
what we're
get them to
saddled
come
with.
to like the Starfleet swingers getaway.
I think even as a 9-year-old kid seeing this in the theater, that resonated with me. Like I always felt like a loner. It's probably why I liked Star Trek. I didn't even the close friends I had were very different from me, and probably
nerd.
The idea, yeah, they certainly didn't watch Star Trek. I would watch that alone always.
Yeah.
So the idea that you can be alone, but if you find other people who are alone in the same way, then you're not alone anymore. That's the appeal of Star Trek to a great degree. That's why there's fan conventions.
Indie country band Blue Rodeo, if we are lost, we are lost together.
Yeah, exactly. So I think
I think you
why
might
that
be,
stuff
I
hit
think
me
you
so
might
hard as
be
a kid.
putting more weight and emphasis on the friends are important element of Star Trek. As a
No. It's the fact that it's in place of
as
something
long
else.
as we have friends. I think there are other things going on in Star Trek. Yes, but and I know
No,
that's not
you're
what you're
misunderstanding
simplifying
me.
to. I'm intentionally being obtuse.
Okay, fine. I'll drop it then.
You go
Let's
ahead
keep
and
sipping my
explain.
coffee.
It's all right.
Again, I feel like I'm pissing in the Trekkie pool here because I'm not. Again, the end of the movie, the climax of the movie.
I guess you
the
can call it that.
confrontation
It
with
is awful.
The events that we spend the whole movie waiting to happen is fucking brutal. You guys, it's brutal.
A giant television screen appears, and
I was the one telling you going into this podcast. I'm telling you, Larry, the motion picture is a better movie than Star Trek V. I'm telling you. Now, funny enough, in rewatching it, you know, there are two places, and we'll talk about it when we get to the rankings, which we're going to have to cut this review pretty short here soon, I think, right? It's going on.
We're getting there, yeah.
But there are two places where there's a little bit of humming and hawing for me on the list.
The bottom of the list is tougher than the top.
The bottom of the list is tougher than the top, but we'll talk about that when we get to the rankings. Star Trek 5.
So the climax.
Sorry, the climax of the movie. You know, again, I like the idea of a Vulcan villain who is an honest villain. Like Spock, focused with malevolent intent, is terrifying, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't get that. So we get this villain at the end. And his sudden turnaround, oh my god, I was wrong, I will sacrifice myself to buy you guys the time to get out of here, happens so quickly and so clumsily that I think I missed the actual moment where the movie actually peaked. Like,
right.
Oh, we're done.
Well, because it didn't happen, because they didn't get to film what was supposed to happen. They showed up on the day, and the rock creatures that were supposed to chase them didn't look right on camera, so they were like,
I'm saying
something else.
The emotional punch of the end of the movie, I mean, would have had more to it. Maybe I would have forgiven row, row, row your boat into eternity.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the closing of the curtain on the Star Trek universe. If not for the fact that, like, there was all the events leading up to this has just been terrible, and then we have this pretty saccharine final scene, and I don't know, not a fan.
No,
not a fan.
There's a big dump. It's a giant, big, steaming dump.
I do agree with you that the Cybok character, like the on paper
idea
character outline for that character, is one of the strong points of the script. I would prefer to see a Star Trek V that's maybe Spock's brother Shybok, played by Sean Connery, shows up, and is actually Spock's quite happy to see him, etc., etc. Maybe he's a Romulan agent though, and he's trying to steal the Enterprise for some reason and get it be into the neutral zone instead of into the Great Barrier. Spock is forced to make a choice between whether to kill his brother or... Right, there's all sorts of fodder there for a story too, except exciting and not stupid, although probably needs a bigger budget, right?
Mm-hmm.
The budget for this movie was, what? Let's see, $33 million. Not a tiny chunk of change.
That's hard to
and
believe.
Funny enough, that's $5 million more expensive than Star Trek VI. As
if they were going to throw more money at it after this movie.
We're looking at it. Star Trek V was more expensive than 2, 3, 4, or 6.
Yeah, and it's the most reviled of all 6. So
I think I'm done kicking this horse, man. Is there anything you guys want to say about 5? I'm sorry, I feel like I've been kind of...
I didn't realize until just this moment when I looked over these cheat sheet numbers that it was the most expensive of all of those movies. That actually... That makes me angry. It makes it worse. Star Trek V just got worse for me, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it live on tape.
It was more expensive than the first?
The first one is the only one that cost more than Star Trek V. The first one was $46 million, and that, of course, is $19.
And that one went way over budget too. So its original production budget was probably less than what 5 was for. But the only thing I want to say is that I in no way am under the illusion that this is a good film.
But
it's
you
just
got
that
a soft spot for it.
I would way rather watch a movie this bad that has a couple scenes of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy saying things to each other in ways that make me feel good about having watched those characters in other stories, and are just a tiny little, like, shining moment in a 100-minute farce, than a really bad movie that doesn't have those characters in it. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
It's
so for hardcore Trekkies only.
Yeah, for somebody those characters mean a lot to, then you can enjoy this film in spite of itself.
Well, I think this was my final go on the final front.
I think it was Kevin Smith who said that, you know, I'm a star in reference to the prequels. Look, I'm a Star Wars fan.
Right.
And that means that when it comes to the prequels, I'm going to focus on the positive stuff, and I'm going to choose to like them to the extent that I can.
I will love the Star Wars I have,
right?
Because after a point, what choice do I have?
Kind of how I feel about Star Trek V. There's about 25 minutes of that movie that I can just think about and be fine. And the rest of the time,
this movie taught me to be an optimist.
All right.
There you go.
But speaking of somebody who likes but doesn't love the Star Trek universe, I say you could probably safely skip this one.
The Klingon Empire has 50 years of life left to it.
To offer Klingons a safe haven within Federation space is suicide.
They're animals. Jim, they are dying.
And you, Captain Kirk, are to be our first olive branch.
Me?
The galaxy stands at a crossroads.
This is the Starship Enterprise. We've been ordered to escort you to your meeting on Earth.
Guess who's coming to dinner?
I have so wanted to meet you, Captain. One warrior to another.
Right.
On the verge of peace.
The undiscovered country. The future.
On the brink of war.
We come in peace, and you blatantly defy that.
We haven't fired.
According to our databanks we have, I shall blow you out of the stars.
Now, the crew of the Starship Enterprise
will not be the instigators of full-scale war on the eve of universal peace.
They're coming about.
Battle stations.
Fights not to win battles.
Incoming!
Signal our surrender.
Captain?
We surrender!
But to end them forever.
And then it was Star Trek VI, The Apology, or The Undiscovered Country, as it were. I think that if you were to try and squint your eyes a little bit, you might see some subtle parallels with the Cold War going on in this tale. The Klingon Empire is...
I hadn't thought of that, Larry.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
I like to dig deep when I do these reviews. The Klingon Empire is falling apart, and they can no longer maintain the war. They're going to have to basically evacuate the Klingon homeworld, and they have no choice but to play ball with the Federation. And Admiral Kirk at this point, again...
No, he's a captain.
Oh, he's still a captain?
Yeah.
Anyway, because he's been
demotion.
such a figure in this conflict, has to sort of be host to this political affair.
Thanks to Spock volunteering.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, because it's not Star Trek V, shit goes down and it gets really ugly and intense.
And it's exciting and interesting.
Exactly.
And it makes sense.
The Klingon ambassador is assassinated in a pretty half very impressive, half frustrating special effects sequence, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And Kirk and his main buddies are put in prison. Kirk and McCoy are in prison, and
Merc and McCoy.
Spock goes all Sherlock Holmes.
And Spock's trying to
they're in prison with Iman.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah,
which if you're going to be in prison,
we got space prison, and they got to break out of there, and they got to like repair the piece,
flux capacitors.
And they've got to fight this evil Klingon, and shit's happening.
That's right,
and
the Klingon that can fire while cloaked.
Yes. And
by
quote
Christopher
Shakespeare.
Plummer.
Yes,
right.
Christopher Plummer just playing it full to the hilt.
Full Klingon.
So say what you will about Star Trek VI, but it certainly has an energy and a momentum that was lacking in Star Trek V.
Mm-hmm.
And for that alone, I sigh a breath of fresh air and I feel relief. Now, the real question is, does it measure up with some of the other ones at Star Trek? And I think generally pretty close, but maybe overall not quite.
Mm-hmm.
I think this one, this one to me functions the best as a film if you're... This one and 4 function the best as a film if you're not a Star Trek fan. Like if you're just seeing the characters for the first time and what you know of them, you've like heard in little conversations in passing, that kind of thing. I think maybe this one even more so. The first one allows you to enjoy it really strongly. if you know a little bit more about why it's funny that the characters are interacting differently than we're used to.
Right.
So you need a little bit more backstory on them for that to function. This one doesn't really rely on that in the same way for entertainment value. It really is... This stuff could all happen with other characters who weren't Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Bone, or Scotty, and the story could still be just as enthralling, really.
Yeah.
You could be just as engaged. So I think that's why it's not one of my favorites. Like, I enjoy the movie, but it feels the least like a Star Trek movie, probably, of all of them, actually.
I think the egos might have been a little bit further removed from this process. I think that everybody wanted to go out on a strong Star Trek, and maybe actually not constantly fighting with the director or demanding script changes might actually forward that.
Part of that is because the actors, including the leads, felt like they were in good hands with Nicholas Meyer back at the helm.
That's what I was going to say. They brought somebody back who, the reason Wrath of Khan was so good was because they brought somebody in that was a filmmaker first, but really dug the characters of Star Trek and utilized his passion for them in a really strong way. And I think they reintroduced that for 6, and that's why it's, leaps and bounds in terms of just the quality of the film above 5.
Yeah. So overall, like I say, I'm a fan. The distracting things, a lot of them, to me, aren't even entirely the movie's fault. Like, I think they were trying to push some neat special effects. They have the 0G assassination sequence where we see these Klingons floating and getting shot while they're helpless in the air. And as an idea of how to go about killing a room full of Klingons, that's actually pretty savvy.
They're stalking through the ship with magnetic boots, and their face is covered, and everyone else is floating.
They're helpless.
Yeah, because the Klingons are such worthy warriors. If you just beamed onto their ship and tried to kill them, you'd probably
that
get
would be a mess. It would be a mess.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of it, but I don't like the globular computer animated Klingon blood floating everywhere.
It's not
that
even
also
the
isn't
fact that
consistent with canon.
And it's the pinkness is sort of irritating, but it's that effect hasn't held up well. It's
and
not
I think
exactly
at the time people were like,
Terminator.
"Wow, well done." But
I was
right
impressed
away,
at the time.
Yeah,
the pink blood really dates it as an early '90s movie just because it's pink.
It's weird.
Yeah, and
it's
just to put it
choice.
in context, this is 1991,
right?
25 years
the credits
ago
are
when
pink
this was
and
released,
the
right? That's sort of part of why the episode is timed as it is right now.
Yeah, it's almost the 25th anniversary, right?
I think it is, wasn't it? Oh wait, isn't it the 6th? Yesterday?
Yesterday was
so
the
yesterday
25th.
was the 25th
Was the
anniversary.
release date,
the date of the recording, anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so overall positive things to say, but like I said, there's just a few weirdly distracting things. I remember clocking it when we watched the movie, the little cameo by Christian Slater.
Yeah.
It's not really an important thing. At the time, Christian Slater was really, really hot. And he's starting to kind of slowly crawl his way up from where he had been.
He asked to do that, too.
Yeah.
Like he was a big Star Trek fan.
But in 1991, it was like a gasp moment, right? And now
He's
it's
so
just sort of
dreamy.
this weird random inclusion. It's like a trivia, moment, right?
Yeah.
So there's weird little inclusions and moments where they're sort of acknowledging that this is going to be the last movie, and they're having a little bit of fun with it, which doesn't necessarily mesh with the high stakes of the drama that's unfolding.
No, and that's one of my difficulties with Star Trek 6, which overall I think is a strong entry in the Star Trek movie franchise, as far as, especially if you take all 10 of the movies and look at all of them, it's definitely in the top half of those. We'll just pretend that I'm right. Okay, pretend I'm right.
14 if you count Starfleet Academy.
Yeah, exactly. We're not counting fan-made movies, Jared, and video game movies.
Is Starfleet Academy like the Christmas special of the Star Trek universe?
You will have said, I guess it will be earlier in this episode, even though we recorded Star Trek 4 review a week ago or more,
right,
that you were sort of surprised that Star Trek 4 wasn't quite as goofy and sort of Crocodile Dundee as you remembered it being, right? Star Trek 6 is, in moments, that goofy or worse, right? The notion, the scene where the bridge crew breaks out the old dusty Klingon English dictionaries that came from
the universal translator would be recognized.
Yeah, like, even, forget about the stupidness of how that doesn't fit into the Star Trek world. Like, they wouldn't have a bunch of physical Klingon dictionaries sitting around, but the scene itself was hammy and dorkily done, and
it's really only there to give the side actors something to do. and the audience will laugh at it.
It's one of those moments where you were talking about where they shoehorn something in because it's just, again, this is swan song attempt number 2, right? The movie, people were already making jokes about their age at the time of Star Trek V, but this movie in spots really does start to feel like geriatric Trek.
But I'm just as happy that it exists, because I would much rather they end on Undiscovered Country.
I would much rather finish with Second Star to the Right and Straight On Till Morning than Row, Row, Row Your Boat.
Agreed.
Even though I can enjoy the row, 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 row your boat moment, I prefer the Peter Pan ending of Star Trek 6.
Honestly, you could without too much kicking up too much fuss, if you really wanted to end on Row, Row, Row Your Boat, you could just watch Star Trek V last. Watch them in order, but watch 6 before it.
But that moment where
passable.
they break out the dictionaries, that's dorkier than anything they've done in the dorkiest episodes in the 3rd season of the TV series.
And tonally completely out of pace with the rest of the movie.
Yeah, it's so tense and efficient, and functions like a non-Star Trek film in a lot of ways to its benefit as a film, not necessarily as a Star Trek movie, but.
And then that scene comes along, trying to speak Klingon is a better final thing for her to do than the naked.
I'll take it over the fan dance for sure.
But it's still...
And they did it better with other characters. Sulu, they give something to do, and it's kind of awesome. He's captain of his own ship, and
he gets to save the Kirk's ass at the end.
Oh, yeah.
He'd
been waiting 25 years to go, fly her apart then!
Yeah, exactly.
And he fucking owns it when he does. It's great.
He sounds like he'd be a great captain, and he does show up and save the day, and it's good to see him. It makes sense that they would have, not all remained on the same crew for their entire
He'd been giving
careers.
that note as when he'd have meetings with Paramount, when there'd be a new movie script coming up, they'd all have a courtesy meeting where they'd be like, what do you think? Feedback, George. And he would always say, I really think Sulu needs to captain his own ship.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that was an ego thing, right? Because you can only fly the Enterprise for so long under Shatner before you just want to blow your brains out, probably.
Well, ego or not, at least it helped the story, is my point. Him showing up to save the day, that's awesome. It helps the excitement, it ramps up the tension. We have a possible savior, in the wings,
right?
And it's good. So I like that I will definitely say to the positive for sure.
Star Trek is often Shakespearean. Good Star Trek is often very Shakespearean. I don't quite like Star Trek characters directly quoting Shakespeare. We get a lot of in the Next Generation them putting on Shakespearean plays in the theater on the Enterprise, right? But
it's still very important.
But the villain quoting Shakespeare while firing photon torpedoes at the Enterprise is, it's Christopher Plummer. It's exciting, but
I kind of got a kick out of it. I won't lie.
Yeah, for sure. But it's kind of silly. Maybe it only bothers me because those Klingons seem to actually believe that Shakespeare's from Kronos.
Well, and it's just hard for me to believe that Klingons read at all. That seems.
Although I do like the notion that at some point after first contact with the Klingons, some scholar on Earth went, oh man, Klingons are gonna fucking love Shakespeare. We gotta get translating on this shit. Start with Titus Andronicus.
It does come across a little bit as wedged in, and I think that's because that was just Nicholas Meyer. The original title for Wrath of Khan was The Undiscovered Country.
Oh, interesting.
And he just wanted to use that title. So when Nimoy called him and said, what if the wall came down in space? And he was like, yeah, I'm in. I'll make that movie.
Done.
He probably went,
I
can use that title now.
He needed to fill his liquor cabinet.
Well, here's another sort of section of the movie that I'm of two minds of. The whole space prison. First of all, I love this as a concept. This idea of a place. Yeah, this is a place where
Klingon space prison.
Yeah, the worst prison for the worst people in all of the galaxies get sent to this place. It's like Oz on crack, right? Yeah. It's just unbelievable. But in the prison sequence, we get a lot of the goofy humor again, right? The creature that has its testicles where his knees should be, and the supermodel who can change shape that Kirk fucks. They finally got Kirk to fuck an alien in these 6 movies.
And
let's check that off the list, because that would have been something that they'd missed.
And check off Kirk's bucket list.
Right.
He gets to fuck himself.
Yeah, exactly.
He gets to he first fuck himself and then turn into literally himself and have a big fight. Those are Kirk's favorite things. Himself, fighting, and sex. And he gets to fight, sex, and be himself.
But I enjoy that sequence of the movie, but part of me feels like this should be the scary part of the movie, where our heroes are in peril, and we're scared for them.
Well,
and I'm not.
Much like any episode of Star Trek, the tension didn't ever hang on whether they were going to die or get out of it. It was about how they got out of it,
Right.
and what we learned as a result. And that's kind of, I think that's why Star Trek 2 is most people's favorite, because it breaks that rule to its benefit.
There was a certain amount of... I remember going into Star Trek 6 thinking, damn, Nicholas Meyer killed people last time he did Star Trek.
And there was that shot in the trailer where they showed Kirk getting vaporized, and everybody... There was so much... Even as a 10-year-old, like I was 11 at the time, and even then, reading Starlog magazine, there was all this speculation about, well, since the fourth movie, they've been talking about how there's going to be no peace with the Klingons until Kirk's dead.
And it would make sense for the whole thing to wrap up with Kirk heroically sacrificing himself. But for those of you who haven't watched it for some reason, it's actually the space Iman supermodel.
As you can take the shape as anybody.
Yeah, the shapeshifter, right?
She's a commonoid.
Yeah, so...
I really do like the trial sequence.
For sure.
I really
the
like
trial?
the Klingon trial sequence.
Warp's on board?
the set design, it's one of the best pieces of set design, I think, in the history of Star Trek. It feels like something worthy of a movie in a way that all of these 10 and 20 and $30 million budgets just can't afford. Somehow they managed to make the Klingon prison really...
It really rang true.
Good.
That's why I think a lot of that sequence, that like snippet of what we see of the Klingon world is present a lot in design stuff in Next Gen after that.
And it's funny that
they really like carry that on, and it stuck with it for the rest of Star Trek.
Right. It's funny to me that in the same movie where that irritating bit where they're trying to translate with the Klingon dictionaries, we see sort of how it should be done in Star Trek during the trial. They're all doing their sort of UN style, everyone's speaking their native language, and the computer's translating it all for everybody.
Until they find Babelfish, that's what they
and that
do.
That disparity, that like inclusion of stuff that just makes you shake your head in an otherwise really solid, tight film, I think is my biggest disappointment, or my biggest like strike against it, is that from the people involved in arguably the best Star Trek film, you get this new film and it's going to be the last one, and then you go see it, and certainly compared to that one, but compared to the arc of all six in general, it just kind of feels not flimsy, but just kind of light. It's like Star Trek light.
It almost feels lighter than 4, and 4 was supposed to be the light entry in the series.
Yeah.
Well, it sort of kicks in and out of that.
It's just not ballsy. There's ballsy stuff that happens in 2, 3, not really in 4, although there's stuff in 4 that feels meaty.
Here's my question. The movie's about the wall in space coming down, the Berlin Wall, right? The collapse of the Soviet Union.
That's the setup,
in this case, right? That's the setup. But what does the movie end up saying within the context of that allegory? Like, what's the message of the movie regarding the Cold War?
Peace does not come easy. Both sides are going to have to meet in the middle.
Everyone's going to have to get together and eat blue food and quote Shakespeare together with the Soviets to make things work. There's something important in this movie that we need to touch on, though, and it's something that would maybe have made the movie feel a little bit less light, and that would have been if the Valeris character had actually been Lieutenant, or by now I would have thought she'd be Captain Saavik.
Right.
Yeah.
But Canadian actress, what's her name?
Kim
Cattrall steps into the role, which clearly was supposed to be Saavik.
I'm sure Nick Meyer wanted Saavik, right? When he wrote the script,
it was.
It was Saavik.
Or the original idea, because Nimoy co-wrote this.
Yeah.
They brought Nicholas Meyer in after they'd already wrote the story and everything.
But it would have been so much stronger if this character, we had two other movies of history with her, even with two different actresses. I think that we would understand that this is Saavik, and we would have gone with the recasting again.
Yeah.
Because it takes the twist when she's part of the conspiracy. Spoilers. The weight of that is completely gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is one instance where I actually disagree with Nimoy's reasoning, because he was the one who said Saavik would never betray Spock. I don't buy that, and the audience won't buy it either.
Mm-hmm.
And
I would.
Done well,
I would have
the audience would have been really hurt by it.
And it would have tied the movie...
But they would have got it.
It would have tied the movie to 2 and 3 in a way that it wasn't tied to those movies. If that character had been Saavik, and it would have made what at the time we all thought would be Spock's final appearance as a character, even though he ends up showing up for another decade and a half.
Yeah. My argument to Nimoy would be, well, Spock would never see it coming, and neither would the audience, and that's great.
Exactly what we want for this.
Yeah.
Right. I think it would have improved the movie by a long shot to have that be Saavik. It would have been interesting to have Kirstie Alley come back to do it.
Going back
right?
to, she wouldn't have fit on the bridge.
Exactly.
Going back to the first movie, though,
1991.
the first movie, I was complaining that they brought in new characters to, heavily focus on them and then kill them off. Well, this is kind of a smaller version of that, right? Again,
it's not as bad as Ilea and Decker.
No, but it knocks on the door for me as far as like what could have been there. Right?
It's just not ballsy at all.
Exactly.
And I mean, if you've ever read about the law of economy of characters, once you've heard that law, so many story developments like this don't function as a surprise in any way.
No,
but if it had been Saavik, you could still like have read about that law and still be like, no, they wouldn't do that. She would never betray
Nimoy
Spock.
himself said,
like it would have
she'd
worked.
never
It would have
betray
served the
Spock.
story the same reaction that he had, just like ego-wise, because he doesn't. The characters are real in his mind, and he doesn't want bad things to happen to them. That's fair.
It's Spock's affection, or it's Nimoy's affection for the characters getting in the way, because a cold, calculating Vulcan like Saavik, she's not entirely cold, right? I mean, she has some emotional connection with Spock that we see in those earlier movies, even though she's not supposed to.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very interesting idea to have a Vulcan just sort of reason out that, you know what, an act of terrorism is required here. Yeah. And my feelings have nothing to do with it. This is what needs to be done. And then doing it, even though it means betraying somebody she's feels, or doesn't feel, but is bound to and should be loyal to, betraying
a child
that person.
together. You can find out in the original script of 3.
Yeah.
Or 4. Yeah, and also...
Because this is how you get pregnant, is finger touching.
Right.
One,
I avoid finger touching.
Avoid finger touching, you might end up having...
I just put a condom on before I touch fingers.
Very nice.
Good idea.
So, yeah, and the fact that she's older, too, she's been around... Like, she was his protege in 2. So, whereas Kim Cattrall, Valeris is this young, fresh out of the academy character, right? Which is what Saavik was in 2. So, I found it, like, again, when you compare the potential of if it had been Saavik, I would have it would have been easier for me to buy she has these prejudices like Kirk does. It would have been an echo of that, right?
Yeah.
That are informing her actions.
Yeah.
And we have to consciously fight against those things because, the fear of change. I mean, Kirk says it right at the end. People can be frightened of change.
But
I buy that more from an older person who has more built-up prejudices than I do from somebody who's fresh out of the academy.
And that theme of prejudice is actually a really strong and good theme in this movie, because I feel like I've been really negative about this movie, which I actually quite like.
Yeah.
That opening scene when Kirk gets the surprise from Spock that he's going to be hosting this ambassador and this dinner for diplomacy, and he says to him, "These people are dying," and Kirk responds unironically, "Let them die."
Yeah, he sounds almost like Khan when he says it.
It's like he's talking directly to Ricardo Montalban.
These people killed my son, and I can't fucking believe that you're gonna make me eat supper with them, you son of a bitch. That's a really strong way to start this movie, and
it's about as like I think I threw the term toothless out earlier in terms of like some story elements.
Yeah.
That's the teeth that the movie does have. Is that when you meet the protagonist that's his first scene.
Yeah.
That's all part of one scene, and at the end of the first scene, the protagonist says something horribly racist.
Yeah.
Yes, it's informed by tragedy that happened to him, but still, he's condemning an entire race because one of them killed his son.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's like, and we just go with it.
Yeah.
We just accept it because we've watched 5 movies of him and we love him.
And he's Kirk.
But
Captain
but
Kirk.
it's terrible, right?
Yeah.
And then the next time we see him, he's committed to fighting against it, even though it's troublesome for him. I guess that's why it doesn't stick in our side too much or bother us
He
too
overcomes
much.
his prejudice.
I would be interested in seeing a version of the Star Trek series that went Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, Undiscovered Country with Saavik, and those teeth from the beginning remaining throughout the film.
And then end with them sitting around a campfire.
Sure, sitting around a campfire, but not singing row, 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 row your boat. They could be roasting marshmallows and eating beans. That's fine.
And going, this is in the way back, but you were talking about how, yes, we understand this is a jolly Star Trek adventure, and they're going to get out of these situations. They even have a plot point where Kirk knows that he's been bugged by Spock. Right. So he has this little inn that he knows Spock's looking for him, that he doesn't let McCoy know because he's a dick.
Yeah.
But it's okay, like, yes, we know that the crew's going to make it through this movie okay. They shouldn't know.
Right.
That they're going to make it through the movie okay. And I think that, especially in the prison sequence when they're escaping there, it seems like jolly fun for Kirk.
But you see, Larry, don't you remember we learned in Star Trek V, that epic pièce de résistance, that Kirk has always known he'll die alone.
Yes.
So as long as he had
Doesn't
McCoy
happen
with
anymore.
him, he, that's maybe why he didn't tell McCoy, is he didn't want to piss McCoy off and then have him storm away. He just wanted him to keep him.
I honestly think that Nicholas
Human
Meyer
shield.
came back to do this one because he wasn't like, yeah, I have to make this movie. Like, he wasn't hungry like he was when he made Wrath of Khan.
Right.
He'd made one movie prior to that. The experience, it was received really well, but the experience of making it had been really
tough,
hard. So he's this young guy. I don't think a big Star Trek fan. I've never heard him say that he was. And it was his opportunity to just make a really kick-ass movie, focused on those characters, and the story had teeth. He was like, I get to kill Spock.
Yeah.
Like, the one thing that you knew would never happen while watching the show
is happening.
The one thing that was not anywhere on the radar in the first movie, because that movie was meant as a rebirth for them, reintroduce them, so they're not going to kill them. We got to sell toys. And he gets to do it.
Right.
Nothing in this movie, in fact, it seems like the energy was much more so like, we want them to ride off into the sunset the way everyone wants to remember them. So we can't have some big event happen because we don't have another movie and a half after that to then return to the status quo like they did with 3 and most of 4.
Mm-hmm.
But it retires the original crew with some dignity, which I don't think I can say of Part 5.
Right.
And,
well, certainly not the entire crew.
Right.
You know, Sulu gets to have purpose and say and do cool shit in this one. In 5, he's literally there to be made fun of and to fuck things up and then to cave to the madman.
Yeah. Scotty's most memorable moment is that he fucking knocks himself out.
Unconscious.
Like, they take Scotty, what should be Montgomery Scott's final awesome moment, and they give it to McCoy. And McCoy and Spock do surgery together on the torpedoes when Scotty should have been there setting up the torpedo right alongside Spock. Or he should have been doing it alone, right? Like,
but Scotty had done a lot in the movie up till that point, I think.
He just sort of worked with Uhura on the whodunit of where the bloody
and
where the bloody slippers.
At least Scotty knows how to pronounce censor.
Why
does McCoy go censor? I've never got
He spent too much time with Spock because Spock says that sort of thing.
We got a heartbeat. I do love that part.
Scotty does very little engineering in that movie. He hollers at somebody but using the wrong tool, and he walks into an I-beam and knocks himself unconscious.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, though, I'm happy with this as a way up for the original cast. Like,
yes.
Thumbs up.
We're
at 25 minutes. Is there anything else that we want to say about 6?
We often fall into that trap of speaking negatively about movies we
love. I know.
Because we're trying to pick them apart and figure out which, it's the ranking process forces you to be cruel.
I guess.
Especially when you've got 6 movies, 4 of which are pretty near and dear to your heart, and the other 2 have great nostalgia value.
Yeah.
Right?
But I think, like, someone listening to this could think, well, we're kind of hard on Part 6. Thing is that I like it, and I like it quite a bit. Like, it's fun.
And if you think we're being overly hard on it, stay tuned and hear our rankings, and then you'll hear how we really feel about it. How it stacks up.
The biggest compliment that most people would pay to 5 is that because of it, we got 6.
Yeah, exactly.
Because 5 utterly shat the bed instead of
shat
the bed.
It shat the bed.
It shattened the bed.
Good enough. I wanted to ask you guys a seriously important question.
I think I know what this is going to be.
Marry, fuck, kill in the Star Trek universe. I guess I'll maybe let you guys first. I came up with answers, but I feel like they were answers out of ignorance. So
I don't know. I kind of want to hear your answers for your Marry, Fuck, Kill. You usually don't go first, right? Or do you ever give answers?
I mean, I don't go first for the ranks. I can go first for this if you want. Do you guys want me to go first?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, kill is a gimme. Okay? I would kill Troy.
Okay.
From the Next Generation because she is terrible. Like,
is that also going to be your fuck though too?
The character, the execution of the character, like there's nothing good about Troy.
Yeah.
Like I want her burned from the record. And this is
add to that her mother, and that when there's a Troy episode, there's a good chance that Loxana Troy, her mother's coming along. She's also irritating. It's not my kill. You can have it.
Mary goes back again to the Next Generation and to a sort of a traumatizing event that happened when I watched it as a kid. They killed off Tasha Yar.
Yeah. Your wife!
And I was so, like, I thought Tasha Yar was really hot.
Yeah.
Watching it now, she's very 90s. She's almost got this lesbian chic vibe going to it.
She's always dropping these really weirdly
does
timed compliments to the men on the bridge.
Oh, yeah.
If you weren't the captain.
But I remember they killed her off like very abruptly too.
Yeah.
It wasn't even particularly heroic. Like
she was drowned in inside a tar creature.
Yeah,
he just
like
sticks
a
his hand out and
tar
shoots some
Anyway.
energy at her, and she dies.
I always felt bad, and people are hard on her for this Pet Sematary movie she did, but I thought she was fine in that, and I guess I would marry Tashi.
It was an unceremonious death. But yeah.
I always felt bad that she got killed.
You'd marry her before or after she was dead.
She's less willful.
Let's say while she's alive.
I'll say Denise Crosby in 1987-88.
The actual service itself is awkward if she's dead. So, fucking here's the controversial one. I can't remember the name of the character, but in Star Trek 6, the alien that could take the shape of anybody.
Yes. We never know her name, but that's the...
Marcia. Marcia. She says, my name's Marcia.
Oh, my name's Marcia. That's Iman. That's David Bowie's wife.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Well, not anymore.
Not anymore.
But,
you know.
Anyway, it was funny because the potential in that seems like you got a lot of options, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, you could fuck yourself if you chose to, or you could fuck whatever comes to your mind, really. So yeah, definitely fuck.
Yeah.
She seems like she'd be a handful to marry, but you know, if we had a strictly
she could also turn into James Kirk for you, though, and that could be hot.
I think that's your dream.
Yeah,
I think that's James T. Kirk's dream. But
I came really close to saying I would fuck Bones because I think that of everybody in Star Trek, he's the guy who needs to get laid.
During our Star Trek 6 review, I was going to say I would have liked Bones to get a happy ending. He's lonely through the whole series. The only woman he ever really gets a love story with is killed by a salt vampire, or is a salt vampire, or both.
Yeah.
Poor guy, just all he wants is a lady friend and a nice mint julep and some shade under a tree.
Hello there, Jim Boy.
And instead he has to hang out with Kirk and Spock
He's
all
got
the
to play
time. No wonder
secondsies
he's...
to the bromance between Kirk and Spock. He has to wait for them to fall out so he can pick up the pieces.
That's right. He just gets to play den mother to
so
the two
a
of
close
them.
second for Bones. But that was my list.
All right. Well, my kill is also an obvious one, and that's Captain Janeway. I want her dead. I want her dead. The Kate Mulgrew, the actress, I find her voice very...
Was she Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, or was that someone else?
No, that was someone else. No, Kate Mulgrew, though, was in... She played...
Where do I know her from, not Star Trek?
Well, I was about to say, she's his cunt wife in Throw 'em Off the Train.
Slut.
That's exactly where she's from.
Yeah, that's where Kate Mulgrew is from. I'm sorry for dropping a C-bomb when I didn't even need to.
You never need to drop a C-bomb, but sometimes it's just...
I think when Voyager came along, it was just about time for Starfleet to finally have a female captain, and I just think they picked the absolute worst possible person.
She was their second.
Was it the actress or was it the script?
No, their first actress was their first choice was a French-Canadian actress who was terrible.
Geneviève Bujold.
Fuck everyone in the history of the universe in a holosuite. I don't know what you guys are thinking about. I would maybe invest in a holosuite business, maybe buy a bar.
It's true. Casual sex would just vanish if holodecks existed.
Exactly. I mean, you could still catch something if you, say, shared a holosuite, used one that Riker had used earlier in the day, and you didn't get it hosed out properly.
But what's the worst kind of bug that you get in a holosuite? Like an ad would pop up halfway through?
Yeah, exactly. You get pop-ups every time you go to take a piss and stick your dick out.
I had no memory of this, but there's actually a sequence in a Next Gen episode where Riker gets come on to really hard by who's the actress who played Jean Grey in the X-Men films?
Oh, Famke Johansson?
Yeah, she's in this episode where she plays like the perfect mate. She's like gonna be paired to a guy for life. Anyway, so she makes out with Riker, comes onto him hard, and he turns her down. And then when he leaves her quarters, he actually like, you know, flips his communicator or something and says like, "If anyone needs me, I'll be in the holodeck."
Now, my Mary is dependent on something, and I have a question for you. Do you guys think that if you marry into the Q continuum, you inherit their powers? Like, if I married Q, do you think I'd become a Q and I could just be God?
I don't know, but I wish there was an episode that dealt
I
with
would
that.
marry Q. If not, Yeoman Janice Rand. Like 1966,
How lame am I
67.
if I was
She's
just-
the one in the little red, tiny little skirt with the
Who was in
beehive,
love with Kirk.
Who would
Is she the one
bring?
that gets
She
fined
would
off with Tom?
saunter her little bum onto the bridge, and Kirk
She was
would
his yeoman. She'd bring him coffee.
And he's really aggressive with her in the evil Kirk episode.
Right. He tries to rape her.
Right,
He tries
right,
to
right,
rape
right,
her.
right,
Like hurts her wrist.
Yeah, I just didn't know her name, but I know who you're
actually
talking
wanted it the whole time. The other option also would be V'ger, because they seem to really enjoy themselves with V'ger, and you could just sort of, that's my other angle at omnipotence. If Q can't do it for me, maybe marrying V'ger would make me a god. I guess I have a god complex.
And apparently, because you have so many selections, you just want to fuck all of Star Trek.
This was Mary. This was Mary.
tough for me.
But fuck was, yes, everybody possible in a holosuite. I noted that I'm basically Riker. Because, yeah, there you go. That's my answer. Jaren?
All right. Well, I would marry... Yeah, this is tough.
I'm sorry to hit you with this, man. I know.
I would marry Q.
You're going to steal my
No.
Q
I'd
answer?
marry
That was
Vash.
my... I said
I'd marry
I'd
Vash
Q.
because then my life would never be dull. I'd fuck Kess because she's just hot as nails.
You should Google her now. Her life
Yeah,
has
but I'd fuck Kess
become
from the show.
sad.
And don't ruin this for me. and I'd kill Loaxana Troy.
So we're on the same page with Troy. I don't know who those other two people
Loaxana is Troy's mom.
Oh, the mom.
Yeah,
she
Gene
was
Roddenberry's
wife, and
Michelle
that's the
Barrett.
only reason she had a recurring role on TNG.
She was the voice of every computer in Star Trek up until her death. Every Federation computer was Troy's
And there,
mom.
at least once in a
I think that's
season-
how Troy got hired for the Enterprise, is that her mom was like the Siri of the Federation and pulled some strings and got her idiot daughter hired.
At least once a season, there's a Loaxana episode where she shows up in the Enterprise and
nothing good
hilarity
happens.
ensues.
Yeah.
But
Twice a
it's-
season, I think. Usually there was like one.
Yeah,
and
there's a
half.
couple seasons where it's two.
There are some
God.
bad, the
But
worst
Troy's
episodes.
there every goddamn week.
The worst is when you have the perfect storm of, there's a Loaxana Troy episode where they're also trapped in the holodeck.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
The A story deals with Troy solving a mystery in the holodeck, and the B story is Loaxana looking for a man.
Yeah.
Find my
That's how
shit
you
out.
know to tune in next week.
Yeah.
Because she was always trying to climb Picard like a tree.
Yeah,
It's pretty hard.
The episode where he finds out she's getting married, and he, whatever. I'll stop
I'm
talking.
sorry,
about it.
but for the ignorant among us, do the first two people that he said who you would...
Who did I say again?
Vash.
No, Mary Vash.
Vash was Picard's one true love in the TV show, which I think is funny because her name means cow in French.
Yeah.
But she was played by, I don't remember.
She was kind of a recognizable actress at the time, but I have no idea.
She
who
was
she
this
is now.
like go-getter space archaeology type, right?
No, she was just a grave robber, basically. She would
Well, she
sell
turned out to
archaeological
be, but
things.
she sort of convinced him that she was an archaeologist for a
Wasn't
while,
there
didn't
supposed
she?
to be a will they won't they with Crusher, Dr. Crusher?
There
Yeah,
was,
there
but
was
they
an
would take
ongoing will
detours
they
from
won't
that.
they. There was, but yeah, Vash sort of like Picard almost had a thing with her. He loved her, but she got away.
She
kind
brought
of
out the
thing.
Kirk in Picard.
That's
It was
right.
like at one point he had a meeting with the writers and was like, "Okay,
Picard
the
needs
captain
to
needs
wet
to
his
fight
wick."
more, and he needs to fuck some."
The other one he mentioned was Kess, and that was the underage girlfriend of the cook on Voyager.
Oh wow!
She was 3 years old.
She was 3.
Her
Yeah.
race lived to
Her
be 6.
race lives to be 7.
Or 7.
Oh.
So she was
So
a
she
fully
was
grown.
She was an Ocampa.
No,
she had
was
really
3
cute ears.
3 Earth years old, but
Oh.
like from her planet, like her
She was fully
lifespan
grown.
was
She was
7
an adult.
years. So yeah, she was a grown up. She was
Yeah.
all grown up, but she was technically 3.
She was basically like 35 by our standards.
She was on the show for the first couple of years, and yes, Jennifer Lien, who
She was
played
super
her,
hot.
was super cute.
Nice.
She was really cute and young, but had this like smoky phone sex operator
Yeah, that was
Like-
the drugs. The drug
It's
addiction.
funny. I just thought it was
there.
hilarious that, as it turns out, I didn't know any of the people that you were talking
Oh.
about when you said Mary Fuck Kill. I thought we'd agreed on Troy, but even Troy's mom, who's also a good pick, but like I said,
I didn't
Troy was
confuse
just
you,
the
did I?
cancer
I
on
guess you
that
didn't
show.
know who Janice Rand was, but you knew all the rest of them.
What was your least favorite of these Star Trek movies and why?
Okay, well, as we hinted at earlier, the bottom of the list is one of the tougher places for me, and we talked about the fact that there are two cuts of the motion picture, etc., etc. And while the theatrical cut versus director's cut question does complicate issues a little bit, I think either way, the motion picture overall is a stronger film than The Final Frontier. And I have to put Star Trek V in last place at number 6. The movie, I can't judge the movie based on the movie it wanted to be, or could have been, or almost halfway was, or once upon a time the movie was a little bulge in Harv Bennett's pants. I can't base the movie on that. I have to base it on the fact that what was projected on the screen was a fucking collage of disaster. Everything went wrong with that movie. And yeah, I can find little moments of it fun, and I can find chunks of it quite nostalgic, and I can enjoy it on that level. But Star Trek V is a bad movie. I will even join you in saying don't watch it unless you're a big Star Trek fan, and you really have to see all of Star Trek. If you're only going to watch 5 of these movies, that's the one to skip.
It's sort of one of those things where you either watched all of them or none of them, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like...
So I tip my hand that second last place in number 5 is going to be the motion picture for me, Star Trek 1. Again, I can't judge it based on the movie that might have been, but Roddenberry's involvement or meddling, depending on how you want to put it, was still a very present force in Star Trek at this time, at least in the movie end of Star Trek. It continued to be a present force on television.
Right.
CBS continued to listen to him a little bit longer than Paramount did. But the movie has some fantastic ideas, some great sequences. I really like the idea of an Earth probe coming back from space being, sentient and godlike even. It's a story we touched on in Star Trek before. There's good stuff for story in there, but it's just, again, falls apart in too many places, and it's sleep-inducing.
Yeah.
There are long sections of boredom in that movie. They were going for something that looked and felt something like Star Trek in 2001, and so it does share that in common with 2001. Success, guys! You made us sleepy. In 4th place, I'm going to put Star Trek 4. And I love the voyage home. It's a nice, fun little jaunt. But as this isn't the other place on the list where I had to hum and haw a little bit, because I almost put number 6 in this spot.
Mm-hmm.
This is my spot in the list where, depending on the day, I might have put 6 in this spot, right? Number 6 it's got stupider moments in it than number 4 has, even though 4 is the lighthearted movie. But they do spend the whole movie on Earth. It's fun, but it does feel like a big, long episode of the show, and Star Trek 6 feels like a movie, right? And because it's the apology, because it's the happy surprise we got at the end, nobody expected them to show up and fix Star Trek. After Star Trek 5, I thought it was going to be fucked up forever. So I was happy to have them show up and make 6. So number 6 is in 3rd place. I've said what I had to say there. The strong points of the movie outweigh the few goofy moments, like Shakespeare being from Kronos and that sort of stuff. Number 3 and number 2 then top off the list, right? So number 3, The Search for Spock. Number 2, I almost consider them two halves of the same movie.
I got them confused into one movie while we were reviewing them.
Interestingly, fans and critics on the internet tend to disagree with me. A lot of them put either 4 or 2. Or 4 or 6 in 2nd place ahead of 3. So I don't know. I'm interested to see where you guys put 3, but that's my list. I'm going to just read them off from my worst to my best. Starting at the bottom, Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. Then Star Trek 1, The Motion Picture, Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. And in first place, I would say the best single piece of Star Trek ever produced in any format is Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan. We'll see.
Mine is different from yours. And it's mostly because 6 and 5 on our lists, the things that you seem to prioritize or like about 1 that put it higher aren't as important to me as the things I like about 5.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically just character. The stuff that's completely absent from motion picture that I feel like is the reason it doesn't feel like Star Trek, what's strong about Star Trek, or what we knew about Star Trek up till that point, it's just absent from that film, and that's the sense of energy, the levity, the chemistry between the characters, the sense of fun. That's all gone. It's just this like sedated, washed out, almost like you're hungover type. But I put in 6th place motion picture, 5th place, and this is a very narrow division, but 5th place is Final Frontier, and it's really only because there's a handful of moments where I have a grin on my face watching it, or feel genuine emotional response that I think was the reaction that was intended by the filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
Like at the end when the creature says, "Do you doubt me?" to McCoy, and he turns and in spite of what's just happened to his friends, responds
I doubt any
honestly.
god who would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing that gives me a
Inflict
strong
pain.
reaction in the motion picture at all.
Yeah. And what does he say? He said,
He says, "I doubt any god who inflicts pain for his own pleasure."
Yeah.
And he says it with a sense of like, this could be the last thing I say right now in his eyes.
Yeah.
So they're very close, but I find 5 a little bit more watchable. That's all. In 4th place, I put Undiscovered Country, and I think again it's not because it's a poorer movie really than 4. It's because 4 has the benefit of being part of the arc of 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
So it feels like it's just part of something meatier. But at any rate, so 6, it's a pretty decent movie. I just feel like it doesn't really feel a whole lot like Star Trek. And like I said earlier, it could be a non-Star Trek film and still function as a film, and that I don't feel like that's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the big strike against it for me. So then 3rd on the list is Voyage Home, and that's mostly just like I said because the things that are set up in 2 and 3 get followed through on in 4, and then we also get a nice lighthearted romp, as you called it, which after 2 and 3 I really felt was due. Like I think I love that they said, all right, we dealt with death in these movies, we've dealt with destruction, we've dealt with rebirth, it's pretty heavy stuff that we had happen. Let's do something that's just happy, that puts smiles on people's faces, and to make a giant left turn like that, I dig that. It doesn't need to be like the other movies. So then number 3 is the same, Search for Spock.
So number 3 would be The Voyage Home.
Yes,
number 3 is 4.
number 2 is
3,
Search for Spock.
And number 1 is 2. That makes total sense.
Second place is Search for Spock, and the older I get, the more I like that movie.
It's a great movie.
And the more I find to like about it. And the only reason it's not number 1 is because I agree with you 100%. Wrath of Khan is just if a non-fan said, show me why you like Star Trek, I wouldn't have to look far. I'd just be okay, well, we'll watch this 2-hour movie. And if you don't like it after seeing this, you probably won't like any other Star Trek because this is the best stuff. I was surprised by the fact that choosing between 2 and 3, I actually kind of wavered. Was like,
really?
After we watched them this time. The only reason I was like, no, Wrath of Khan has to be first place is because for what I said about if I had to pick one film to show non-fans, it would be that.
Mm-hmm.
I actually feel like the stuff that happens in Search for Spock has a greater effect on me. I don't know, that might be more a function of where I'm at in my life now, or just having seen Wrath of Khan more times, so maybe it's diluted. Like the speech he gives at Spock's funeral feels kind of almost
You've
like
watched it too many
cliched now.
times?
Whereas the really heavy events that happen in Search for Spock don't have that effect.
So it's my turn. I thought that I was going to be in a little bit of trouble for putting Part 5 at the bottom of the list. But I'm glad I did, because we now have a new rank and review champion as a result of it.
Oh!
I do think it's the worst of the movies, and here's why. I understand what they were trying to do with Star Trek the Motion Picture. I don't think they did it that successfully, but I understood the choices.
Right.
I do not understand the choices.
Of 5.
In Part 5.
Right.
Almost wall to wall. I do not understand the choices.
Almost every choice.
Like,
this is the sound of a victory cigarette, ladies and gentlemen.
Congratulations, yes. So I guess I just said what my list is, but I'm going to go through it anyway, because that is my right.
Please, I would like to savor this victory as well, yes.
But yeah, no, it's not good. And considering that everybody involved had been involved with Star Trek for a long time, it should have been way better than this.
Yes.
It really, really should have been.
Especially with everyone supposed to be putting their backs into it to say goodbye to Star Trek the right way. The studio should have been putting up dollars.
I'm with you, Jaron. It was close for me in ways because I had to rate the rage and anger of 5 to the sleepiness that I felt in Part 1. Because I legitimately almost fell asleep. My head was bobbing, and that is never a good thing. But like I said, I like Wise as a director. I don't necessarily think this was the movie he was going to make, but I have respect for the man. And I have respect for what he was trying to do, whether or not he accomplished it or not.
No, he failed miserably.
It could have been an interesting...
The movie's at least well photographed,
Yeah.
which can't be said of Star Trek 5.
It could have been an interesting science fiction movie, maybe if it wasn't Star Trek. If it was just a science fiction movie apart from Star Trek.
Or if just Kirk and Spock weren't in it and you let Decker and Ilia be the leads.
Yeah.
Make it a new crew.
But
right?
no, it doesn't work for me at all. It doesn't work for me at all. This is, I guess, based on the extended version, and apparently if you don't watch the extended version, it's less... Sleep-inducing.
Mildly less, though.
But I'm working this off of what we watched together, so that's where
that's how you gotta do it.
I do put Star Trek 4 in 4th place. That actually lined up.
Yeah, it does, right?
And here's the thing. I get that they're going for a lighter, goofier thing, and I get that that's what included in the show a lot. But in the movies, I associate it with stakes. And considering the stakes of this, it's a much lighter, jauntier sort of friendly affair.
You both used the word jaunt, I think, to
Did we?
describe number 4.
It is jaunt.
It's the perfect word to describe
There's something sort of
it reminds me
about
of Shore Leave. That episode is like one of the jauntiest episodes with Finnegan.
I hear the theme from that episode in my head when I watch
the Finnegan
Star Trek
theme.
4.
Yeah.
But as a person who's not super crazy about Star Trek, to the degree that you guys are, what I think about when I think about Star Trek is Klingons with eye bolts covering their face and spaceship fights, and Kirk given commands in the control room, and really 4 doesn't have any of that, right?
Right.
And I give them points for trying something different, and considering it is Humpback to the future, they go back to the 80s to rescue humpback whales, it shouldn't work at all, right? This should be the bottom of the list. Just saying it
and
out
instead
loud.
it's the most profitable piece of Star Trek to date.
So go figure. But yeah, that's where it ends up.
And it got Nimoy 3 Men and a Little Baby.
Yeah, then that was a huge movie. We snicker now. That movie was ridiculous.
He directed the 2 highest grossing movies 2 years in a row in the States.
That's right.
It's Star Trek 4 and then 3 Men and a Baby the next year.
Attaboy. So Undiscovered Country, yeah. It's fun, and it's closer to what I associate to Star Trek. Like I said, cry havoc and let's hit the dogs of war.
They're on the Enterprise.
Yeah.
They fire torpedoes.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Part 4, they didn't even have the Enterprise. They were still flying a
Klingon ship.
So yeah, this sort of seemed, back to what we loved about, or what I associate and loved to Star Trek. And yes, it was just the thank you for letting them end on a stronger note than Part 5. But obviously it's not going to compare to Star Trek 2 and 3. 3 is a degree less good than 2, but only a degree to me. In my head, these 2 movies are one big movie, and a pretty fucking good one. And I think very accessible to people who aren't even Trek fans.
Yeah, and watching, I would even go so far as to say showing someone Star Trek 2 and not 3, you're just being a dick.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They do, Spock dies and it's sad, and they kind of bring him back to life for you in the 3rd movie to give you that sort of good payoff. But Some might argue that, if you're going to kill a character. But I say, fuck it, this is Star Trek. The fans willed Spock back to life.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Star Trek 3 is in second place, and of course Wrath of Khan is unbeatable. I think I was emotionally scarred by the scene with the bugs going in Chekhov's ear. There's like, it was
that
somehow
might be
worse.
the scene that makes these movies appropriate for rank and review. 'Cause
Exactly.
That's some horror movie shit.
But like, he doesn't even just take it out of this little baby worm out of its mother's back and put it directly in his ear. He puts it in the helmet and then puts the helmet on him
And
lets the
it
fucking thing
crawl
crawl.
its way.
It's terrible. And
describes the whole thing in advance to them so that they know what's gonna so that they're more terrified.
I don't know if
they need be.
Yeah. I don't think any other moment in Star Trek will get a more visceral reaction from a viewer than the little baby slugs crawling into Chekhov and
that
Captain
horrified me.
what's his name's ear.
And I have to say, when we rewatched it again, I'd completely forgotten about the dog Klingon that
the Targ
Christopher Lloyd had
in Search for Spock.
Is it Search for? Yeah.
You did it again. Christopher Lloyd's in Search for Spock.
Christopher Lloyd's in
not Wrath of Khan.
Search for Spock.
Sorry.
But when we were watching the movies again, that's one of the moments that I really had this, oh my god, I had forgotten completely about the Klingon dog, and as soon as I saw it, my heart just leapt in my chest, like, that's so awesome. That is such a great detail that they didn't need to have.
And it's funny that we've never before or since seen Klingon wildlife. Like, we haven't seen any Klingons have a pet Targ, though.
You see a Targ in Next Gen. There's an episode where what they think comes to life, and Worf sees a Targ on the bridge.
Oh,
pet, and he starts petting.
Gotcha.
Anyway, I had fun revisiting these movies, and I didn't think we were going to match. So congratulations to Paxton.
What does he win?
Yeah, what do I win?
I will give
what
you
do
a
I
prize.
I
didn't come prepared with a prize, but I promise to you that I will give you a prize.
You really didn't expect us to win.
I really thought I'd fuck this over by putting 5 at the bottom. When we did the review, when we were watching it, you guys kept on saying how, let's see what they're going for here, like you guys were working defense for the movie while we were watching
well,
it.
and I didn't.
You have to as a fan. You have to.
I didn't finalize my list until we were sitting down to record at the beginning of the night here. Is when I wrote this down while we were reviewing Star Trek 5. Is while I wrote this.
I'm a total Trekkie poser right here.
And maybe I'm the Trekkie poser if I'm agreeing with this layman over here. I don't listen to Transport Room 3 very often, so I have no idea.
I do want to thank you guys. I hope I didn't make an irreparable rift in this.
And they never spoke again.
Yeah, you'll have to listen to this to remind each other of what they sound like.
He can't possibly follow through with that if he didn't talk to me about Star Trek. His head would just explode.
Head would start billowing. Illogical. Does not compute.
Must speak about Star Trek to person who understands.
Nerds. Oh my goodness, it's exciting, kids. A new Rank and Review champion. It has happened on this, the 87th episode of Rank and Review. So congratulations, Mr. Paxton Francis. Sorry about that, Matthew. I'm sure that this is a bitter pill indeed, and all the more bitter that it would be Star Trek. But here we are. I hope you guys enjoyed the 2-part trek into space, and I hope you're going to stay with me for our next episode, which I think might be a little bit controversial. But you're just going to have to wait 2 weeks to find out what I mean by that. In the meantime, you could send me feedback at rankinreview@gmail.com. That's rankinreview@gmail.com. Find the show on iTunes, find it on Facebook, and please tell that other movie lover in your life about the podcast. Word of mouth is the best way I got going to get ears to this podcast. As always, thank you for listening. I am your host and random Canadian, Larry Parsons, and you can listen to me, well, whenever you want, but I drop every other Wednesday.